Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. This is a quick update on the store-bought Phalaenopsis. It's not going to be much of an update because there's not much happening, but nonetheless it's been 5 or 6 weeks since we looked at these. I'll let you know that the previous video, the addition to the series, there were 2 bought originally, and I added another one in at which I got at the Wessex show. You saw in the video the main plant had stem rot and just fell apart. I'll also let you know that the smaller plant in that pot dropped all its leaves, so they're both gone. So the Las Vegas has ceased to be long since in the bin, basically. So a miserable failure and quite disappointing. That was not a cheap Phalaenopsis, and that's now a black mark against the seller as far as I'm concerned. Serious one as well. Anyway, this one is again, or was originally, 2 plants in a single pot, which easily split apart and were potted up separately. The name of this one is probably Magic Art, Phalaenopsis Magic Art, but I can't confirm that definitely, because although the blooms when we had them were incredibly similar to images on the internet with that name, they weren't quite the same. But even with the cloning process by the mass producers, there are still variables, so it still could be Magic Art, but I'm not that fussed with the name. Now, the larger of the 2 plants, although there's not much difference, we decided to cut the spike to see if it would shoot out. Well, it's showing no signs of doing that at the moment, absolutely no signs at all. And it may never do that. But what it hasn't done has gone brown and died. So there's still life in it, but whether it will actually branch or not, we will have to wait and see. Now, what I've done with these, as you saw, I've made a lot of holes in the pots to actually add extra ventilation in, because they were drying from the top fast and staying quite wet at the bottom, despite the temperatures in the house. So that has now solved that problem, and they dry quite evenly, yeah, down through the pot. But because there are a lot of roots near the top of the pot, I decided to add some moss, yeah, and the idea was to spray that moss on a regular basis, just to keep it moist around those top roots. That's all it was for, yeah. So unfortunately, I keep forgetting to do it, so it's not working as well as it should. There's nothing wrong with this, it should work, it's a perfectly viable principle, because you can see most of these roots are, you know, a lot of them are hanging out the top of the pot. The only problem is, I don't want any form of feed or anything like that left in this sprayer, so it's just clean water. If I had feed in there, over a period of time it would go off, and obviously as these pots are only getting a quick spritz across the top, I'm not going to use it very fast, so it would be very wasteful in my opinion, so I'm not doing it. So it's just clean water, but nonetheless it's hydration, and it may encourage these roots to either start growing or branch, yeah. The trouble is, when I spray them, as you can see, a fair bit of water does go down in the pot and drip out the bottom. Yeah, so, you know, that's now added some clean water into the pot where I would rather have some feed. So, swings and roundabouts to try and keep these roots hydrated and help keep the plant hydrated in the house, which is relatively dry air in comparison, you know, to out here. I'm normally at about 50% where these plants live, sometimes 55%. It depends whether the heating's on, it depends whether this door's open to the conservatory. Because if that door's open, an awful lot of my humidity out here goes in there. Now that's not good for out here, but it's better for in there. But that's only at this time of year. Once the warmer weather comes, that door remains almost closed most of the time, and the heating would be off at that time. So, right, and the other one that we had, the third one, is this one. And we'll do the same with that while I got the sprayer in my mind, or I should forget again. You know, now this ought to be done, well, when the moss starts to dry. However quickly that happens. You know, I don't know how quickly that happens because I keep forgetting to do it. But what I'll do is I'll check it tomorrow and see if it's actually dry, and if it is, we'll give it another little spray. But as I said, I am adding water into the pot. Now these pots could do with the water. If you have a look at some of the surface, the roots that are near the edge of the pot, they're not wet in any shape or form. Now I could carry on with the sprayer and water this pot with the sprayer, but it's just water. I'd rather they had some feed down in the pot, which they can then dip into over a longer period of time, because that will stay wet longer. So this was the other one, which it had a trade name, Amsterdam, but that's not a proper name. As far as this one is concerned, again, we cut the spike. That's doing absolutely nothing. There's no signs of that moving. And this one has got early signs of mealybugs. There's no serious adults involved yet, but unfortunately there is another plant I've got in the house that does have mealybugs, and it looks like, yeah, if you look under that leaf there's a few. Now when there's only a few like this, let's see if I can get down on one knee so that I can possibly film it. See the little white dots? That's very, very young mealybugs, and they are easily removed like that. Just wipe them off and squash them in your fingers. Yeah, that's all you need to do. Don't need to get out, you know, arsenals of chemicals and things at this stage. Just wipe them off and squash them. That's a bit of moss. That's one there, just showing its shape with its little antennae. Ah, poor little thing. Deader. But certainly in the house, on a Phalaenopsis, the most likely place you're going to get them is on the underside of the leaves, possibly on the top as well, but they love to get down in there. That's where they love to get, down in that crease. And obviously you can't just rub them off with your finger. But what I do, so I'm just getting that lower leaf because I know there's some there. I don't need to see what I'm doing, I can just feel. And then just squish them. But what you can do, or what I do, that's hydrogen peroxide 3%. And what you can do is just spray that in those crevices. Now don't do this when it's freezing cold and leave that moisture in the joints. Hydrogen peroxide 3% has an oxidizing, a fizzing process. Now it's not designed to kill bugs, but given that these are only young mealybugs, they're incredibly fragile. I don't think, although it's difficult to prove, that if a fragile creature of that size was absolutely immersed in something that has a burning effect, I don't think they'd survive somehow. But that's not an insecticide. That's not what it's for. Another thing you could use to just spray like that is rubbing alcohol, the 70% rubbing alcohol. That has an evaporation effect. So the idea is that it would soak into the little blighters and then evaporate so rapidly they would dehydrate and die. But again, it's not an insecticide. Quite honestly, if you start getting mealybugs on plants in the home, I would suggest you get a ready mixed spray, so that it's just there, right next to you. Whenever you see the bugs, give it a spray. Yeah? And keep on top of them. They will disappear. They're not a big deal. The ones that are most difficult to make disappear are scale, and those shouldn't just magically appear in your home. For you to get those in your home, the chances are you brought them in on another plant somehow. They're not very mobile at all. So, they're not going to venture from outside in your garden into your house. That doesn't happen. However, right in the life out of me, one of the blooms just dropped off the cymbidium. Oh, there goes another one. Yeah, that spike's on its way out. Yes, so you may get aphids. They'll come in an open window. They are mobile and they'll get on your flower spikes. Yeah, and they can rapidly multiply. So if you get aphids, get on top of them quick. Get rid of them. Again, a little aerosol insecticide will probably do it. You can wash them off with a sort of high pressure sprayer. Just hold your plant over the sink and blast them. It might not do your blooms much good, but the aphids aren't going to do them much good anyway. So have a little bit of an arsenal around. I mean, if you go to a garden centre or somewhere like that, they'll have ready-made insecticides. Just make sure it mentions suitable for ornamental plants. If it doesn't say that, don't touch it, because it will probably be too strong for orchids. Yeah. So if it says suitable for ornamental plants, it'll probably be okay. And as a precaution, you could try a test. Try spraying one leaf, top and bottom, and then leave it for a bit and see if the leaf's still alive. I mean, some chemicals, can damage orchid leaves, but Phalaenopsis leaves are pretty sturdy. They have quite a thick structure to them. So as far as progress on these plants, none of them are producing any new leaves, so they're not in vegetative growth yet, but I suspect they are just trying to acclimatise from coming from a mass producer's nursery where they're at 28 degrees C during the day, absolute spot on lighting, absolute spot on humidity, and the correct drop at night in temperature with the lights off, and seriously trade sort of feeding with added hormones and stuff like that. So we're never going to compete with that. We can't do that. Yeah. So when they come out of those nurseries, they get bashed around, transported, sent to our place where we buy them, and we then transport them and bring them home. And to a degree, they can then breathe a sigh of relief because at least it stays the same and it doesn't keep chopping and changing. But it can take quite a long time for these Phalaenopsis to get back to normal growth. Yeah, it can take quite a while, as much as a year before you get a new leaf. And in the meantime, it'll just sit there. But the chances are the first thing you'll see is a new root. Somewhere you'll see a new root pushing out, or branches from your older roots, like down in the pot. You suddenly start seeing some green root tips, which means it's coming back into growth. Yeah, and sometimes a Phalaenopsis will start with a new leaf followed by the roots, sometimes both together, but that means it's coming back into active growth. Yeah, I would probably encourage these to get going with that active growth if I took these spikes right off, but as an experiment we're leaving the spikes on to see if they will branch out and produce some more blooms. So that's a quick update on those, and I will seriously try and keep my efforts up of keeping this moss and the top of the pot hydrated, to make sure that in the drier air in my home these plants don't get dried out, because they will lose water from their leaves possibly faster than they can take it up at the base. So by hydrating these pots roots that show near the top of the pot, that will stop that happening, even if the roots in the pot are a bit dry. It'll just keep the plant ticking over. So there we go, quick update on the store-bought Phalaenopsis, and I suspect the next update will be when something happens. That could be a very long time away, but they're alive, the leaves look good. The roots haven't died back or anything. They're just sitting there, getting used to where they live, thinking about what to do next. And that's how they are. See you next time.